go through. So it's like my
Yeah,
own sensibility. So just do a quick read and just have a sense of the essence of the chapter and then send it across.
yeah,
Probably
that's
I'll upload on the Git. Yeah, let me figure out the Git part.
yeah.
Um,
So
adding on
yeah,
to the that you shared.
yeah. So in that particular one, what you can do is the way you do it in GitHub, because for multiple contributors, you have to kind of fork the repository in your profile, uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and then you make a change, and then you have to raise a merge request. So I think that's how GitHub
Oh,
works.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Uh, yeah, so,
Yeah, till I've done my own uploading and all that in it and all of that. I haven't done a fork of another person's repo, but yeah, let me. I'll do that this week. I'll figure out.
yeah. Yeah. So error handling, it's a small topic. It's not too big. Uh, a few things that I'll cover. One is handling exception is like one thing. So the thing with Java is like one of the hardest thing to do is like this error handling. It looks simple, like you put a try and catch or whatever, you throw an exception around, but to make it meaningful, it's one of the hardest thing. And then there are scenarios where you can have multiple different, it can throw different types of exception and so on. So it it's a very it's a very useful tool to know, and you really need, you kind of get better by handling a lot of exceptions. So you kind of create a lot of exceptions, and then you know how to use it, because there's another context is like where you use the advanced features like lambda. I mean, it's not advanced, but like in Java 8 they started lambda. So handling those exceptions in a different scenarios, that kind of it becomes a little bit challenging, or it not challenging, it's mainly a little bit tricky. So you need to be aware how do you want to expose exceptions and so on. So that's one of the key aspects of it. So from the book perspective, I think it's pretty straightforward what you have mentioned. So I'll just talk about this handling exception is one thing. So what do you mean by that is like you whenever you create a method and with the method has the method logic, and it has got and it can throw an exception, like you do a try and catch. So, yeah, got this one. So you have this try, and then you have a catch here. So like I think we so what Rob yeah, Robert C.
Are you
Martin.
sharing some
Uh,
screen? So are you sharing
oh,
some screen?
oh,
Yeah.
you're not able to see my screen. Oh,
No, no, no.
okay. See, yeah, I started recording, but I did not share my screen. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this was what I was actually going through. So you have one of the things that you talk about is like handling exceptions, one thing, and when you are, well, what does that mean? What it means is like you have this kind of a method. A method does two things: calculating RTO pricing, and then if there is an exception, it throws an error. It actually doesn't even throw; it just logs an error. So the way you want to do it is like this particular piece is you kind of extract it as a one method, because that is actually doing the calculate RTO for pricing. And within this particular track, you can kind of add that. So I'll just do it on this one. So, so what you can do is you can kind of extract this one as a method, and then you can say so you kind of create this kind of a method where you're just putting this, you extract the entire logic out into a different method. What that does is like if you have a scenario where there are, this is a catch-all exception, but if you have a, it's just going to catch IO exception, and then you have the runtime exception. You have multiple, you're handling multiple exceptions. So in those scenarios, your people can really understand, okay, you know what, this particular method can throw me this particular exception or this kind of an exception, and so on. So that makes it a little bit cleaner. And so that's one of the ways you can use it. Um, it's not necessary. So if there's only one try and catch, maybe you can avoid it. But if yeah, you have multiple catches, going to handle multiple exceptions, then it's better to have this kind of a thing, because then it's much easier for people to read that problem. Any thoughts? Okay.
Makes
I'll go to
sense.
the next one. The next one is avoid error codes. Now this was one of the earlier, like maybe 10 years back, we used to have this error code. We used to have a database which would have different error codes. And so like it will be like some error 01, error 02, and with description for each of these error code and so on. But that created a problem that somebody has to maintain that, and nobody would know if you send an error 01, nobody would, they would have to go and look up into the database. And somebody, if you have to add a new error, you have to go and update the database. It was just became too clunky to do it. So this is a better way, like you don't do error codes, you just send back an error saying this is an exception happened, and you give a context as to what exception happens. So uh, whenever you are catching this exception, so what you can do is this is not right. Basically, what you do is you throw another new, maybe I got a data not found. I got only data not found. Okay, uh, and then you say data issue. I'm just giving just an example. Don't go for it. And for if there's a runtime exception, I'd say throw be another exception if I create it. If something went wrong, like so we can just do it. And then you can add so new.
Do we
Yeah,
need to catch this error or not? Because we are throwing one and it will somewhere we have to catch it, right?
yeah. So
Some
it's always better for the caller, right, to handle that exception. So if it's an API and if you're sending it to UI, right? So UI will get that exception. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to say if it's a data not found exception, so then UI will take that decision. Okay, it got a data not found exception, it will do something else. It got an interrupted exception, it will do something else. So that logic will be in the, if it's a UI, it will be in the UI. But if it's a, say suppose there's another API that's calling, then they will handle that scenario. But what we are trying to do is we don't expose the inner working of that particular inner problem. Like with this particular API had some problem with IO, we don't go and expose that to the caller. So we kind of wrap it around in a much more business, the in a way which would be understood by the caller, but we don't give out the actual details of the exception to the caller, because that might be a third party API, right? So we don't want to expose our internal things to them. So that's why we what we do is we wrap it around into we call it like business exceptions, so that it will make sense to the caller, and then send it to them as an exception, so that we don't show the inner workings of it. So, well done.
so
Yeah. Got
here so in this case where we are throwing it to front end, so here can we make use of those error codes?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. If yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what we don't want to do. Like if you send error codes, then yeah, it becomes your exception is much more clear, right? You know that okay, this is a particular exception that has come in. If it's to send error code, what we do, one of the things we do is we do a thing called, whenever we are sending back an error, we send it as an JSON saying that error,
Mhm.
so maybe data issue, and then we also give a description as to what the error description was. That is one thing you can do, because that will give some more context to the caller, saying that this is something has happened on this particular piece. But other than that, we don't send back a lot of information. We try to hide the implementation details to the caller, because otherwise they will get confused as to what's happened. Why do you want to send so many details? You just want to send those details that are required by them, and that will may help them take a decision as to what the next action should be.
Understood.
So what we are trying to do is we are just removing any tight coupling between two systems. It will be a loose coupled system. Like we just throw the this API will throw exception one, exception two, exception three, and that is a contract. So the caller will then handle it based upon what their business is. They don't need to worry about what's happening within it, or we don't need to know what they are going to do with it. So it's like a loosely coupled thing. So if tomorrow, if I need to, I can go and add a new exception. I need to update the contract. So then obviously they will have to update their contract as well. So, but other than that, it kind of makes it the systems remain loosely coupled on those scenarios.
Okay, understood.
That was the other bit. Um, yeah, and I said that we give error messages within. We send a JSON object out. No, that I've implemented here. I don't think I'm. So we send a JSON object. We're sending a message here, but otherwise we send a JSON object with error message and error code. So that will give a little bit more context to the caller. That will help them, take a particular decision. Yeah, the same thing. Create exception that will caller to identify the issue. Um, and for us also, it becomes easy. So if they come back and tell us, what, we received an internal server exception, we know that, okay, what, something wrong has happened in our system, and we can check the logs. Or if the data not found exception, we can just say, what, there was no data for that particular request, and that's why it went in. So it's easier for us to help during the support calls. It's much more easier to explain to people as to what happened. Yeah, the next one is use exception for error condition, not for control flow. Yeah, it's a simple thing, but sometimes I haven't seen it. Maybe because I've been working mainly in enterprise organizations. But yeah, you don't want like you use your if and for loop and all those control flow statements to control the flow. It's not use any exceptions. It's not send any. Yeah, because they are not an error. If it's an error, that's when you throw an error. Something that is not expected to fail, and something wrong happened. That's when you do it. For other things where, if this happens, do this, or you do 10 times this particular actions, those kind of things, just mention, do it through control, like if, for else, switch conditions, whatever. But exceptions are only for errors. And yeah, another thing is you would want to remember is this, having this kind of multiple exceptions, this is very expensive on the system. So one other thing, what I, or like most of the developers would try to do, is we try to avoid writing. We try to create a code which doesn't throw many exceptions, minimize the number of exceptions. The reason is these exceptions are expensive from a code perspective, performance perspective, and everything. So we try to minimize exceptional scenarios, and that would and yeah. So if there's a business rule, now I'll give a very simple example that like happened last week. Um, there was a business. So we do a. I work for a telecom organization, and which provides broadband. And there was a scenario for moves. For example, a customer moves from one house to another house. Now, when they move from one house to another house, there's some business logic where we have to ask them whether, like, if it's a new connection, we ask them, whether the connection, we found an active service, is this your service or not? We kind of ask this. So, for example, customer might move from a broadband A and they come to broadband B. So which means they already own that service, and then they are moving into they are changing the service providers. That's why we ask them whether they use whether it's your service or not. But now when the customer is moving houses, the new connection will never be their connection, right? It will always be somebody else's connection. So we don't need to ask that question. We know that default the service will never be owned by the customer. This is a business scenario. So one of the developer, the way they implement it is like what they would do is like on the front end when they have to call the API, they would pass default value saying not owned. This service is not owned because it's a customer is moving house. And then what he would do is like if it's a say there's some logic which would determine that this is customer is moving house. If this is a moving house order, then if and the service is not the service is owned. So I will say service is not owned. I'll just write it out. It's much easier. So if it is a move order and service owned equal to true, then throw exception. Why? Because that cannot happen. If it's a move order, you cannot throw you cannot have it cannot be your service. It will be somebody else's service. So yeah, let's fix this. Yeah, if it's a move order and if service owned is equal to true, then we throw a exception saying validation exception. That this cannot be valid scenario. So then the problem now what happened was we created an exception because we are doing this. Now what we decided after some discussion is that we don't want what we are doing right now is the front end is setting the service only to some value, and whatever comes from front end we need to validate. So instead of front end sending whether the service was owned or not, we said if it is a move order, is move order. Then we just set a service on equal to false. So what that will do is then I'm not throwing an exception. I don't need to validate. So whatever the front end was defaulting to service owned equal to false, some front end also does not have to change. It will just say that this is a move order. This business logic now will say, okay, if it's a move order, we just service owned equal to false. So I have avoided one exception. I avoided one change on the front end. And then I also ensured that the business logic remains in the back end. It doesn't is not exposed to the front end. So that is like one way of by thinking that why are we having this additional exception? We could just simplify the entire feature that the person was working on. So that this is like one of the examples of how do I minimize exceptions. Any thought? All right, I'll move ahead.
One related point this is that came up again just on going through the book and
Yeah.
probably given a slightly higher level perspective and product part. One line that really struck me is that this line that you'll end up with a good amount of separation between your business logic and your error handling, and that separation is healthy to keep the business logic separate and the complete error handling part. Any comments on that or anything?
Yeah. So when they say business logic
and how to actually achieve it, during production or either how is it achieved during the coding setup?
So all this error handling that you have, right? Whenever you're throwing an exception, that is the error handling. Error handling
Yeah,
means something went wrong.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is not expected. The business is not expecting that thing to go wrong.
yeah.
So that is your error handling logic. And business logic is so it's a calculator, right? It has to calculate
True,
yeah,
true.
addition, subtraction, and everything. So that's your business.
Yeah,
So how to add, subtract, and divide is a business logic.
yeah,
If a customer enters divide by zero, right? It will
yeah,
throw an exception. So that's the error handling that nobody in the right mind would do that kind of a thing.
yeah.
So that piece is your something went wrong kind of a scenario. So that's separate from how do you add, subtract, or divide kind of thing. So that's how
Got
your
it.
separation. So when you're writing code, uh,
Yeah,
you'll so you'll write a scenario. Okay, so there are dumb customers maybe, and they might do this divide, but somebody is just for fun they will do it. So we need to handle it. Our code should not
mhm,
break. So that's
yeah,
a error scenario that we will handle. But the business logic will remain as is. It will be there in this,
sure.
like you have this calculate RTO price. That's a business
Yeah,
logic. So that is how it has to calculate. That will remain there. Yeah. So
got
that
it.
I think from that perspective, that it's
Yeah.
written in the book.
And in this layered architecture, we capture the business logic and the service part, and then for exceptions, we create a separate folder, and all the exceptions are
Yeah.
tackled there in
Yeah.
this layered
Yeah.
architecture. Okay,
Yeah.
got it, got it. Okay,
Yeah. Moving to the next bit is null handling. So yeah, for the null, it's yeah. I think there are two cases what he has mentioned, like avoid null arguments to method or avoid returning null. Um, that it's a very good thing. Like I have seen there are code where what happens is somebody would write something like okay, handle order and then order status and say false. What this would do is now if now because I've registered in front of you, what would happen is like you would just start wondering what is false. Why did the person send false here? And you stop to think and you start looking around. Oh, why this is false, and then you'll figure it out eventually. But the problem is by sending this kind of a thing, this is a boolean, right? Sorry, that's a wrong example. Yeah, it's basically null. Uh, yeah, okay, so sorry, I thought it was I went to the wrong direction. uh, I was thinking about boolean. Yeah, so you can kind of have this scenario where people send null into this. I've seen now there are two parts to it. One is if you send null, which means you are expecting there are certain value that the particular method was handling, but it is going to be as null. So I mean, for me, I also have followed this particular pattern where I have a handle order, say order status, comma, um, order ID. So I got this particular method there, and what I will have another method handle order, and here you will have implementation logic, and then you have a simple like, and this method would call order status command. So this is one way where we actually pass null into the argument. So what has happened here is that there's a function or there's a method here which needs both order status and order ID. But now you found, in your business logic that there are scenarios where this order ID can be null, but you still want to handle this order. And in this implementation logic, you would have that condition where you kind of look at null in some way. So in such scenarios, you kind of use this approach where you create an overloaded method here and it just puts order status and it just passes null. And what are the calling function? It's actually much simpler to do this. Otherwise, what would happen is then if the order ID is not there, then I need to add within this implementation logic, I need to then check for order ID equal to null, do something. I need to do this kind of a code. So, but if I don't have this, then I can kind of do in this fashion as well. So I kind of use the method overloading to do this. So in this scenario, I can do pass null, and people can understand why I pass null, and I don't need to handle it anywhere else. Code becomes there's one less if else condition on that one. But then he has he said that we should not pass null to the method. I can see the problem. The problem is that if the caller, then somewhere you need to handle that null in some shape or form, and it's one of the biggest challenges in the code where it can throw null pointer exceptions. So that's why I try to avoid null. And returning null is a bigger problem because if a method is good, if we know a method is going to return null, then whenever that method has to be called, it has to be checked for a null pointer exception. You need to check whether the method has returned null or not. So that's just an additional check you need to add in every piece of code. So that's a problem that's why we don't want to return null. And if we are returning null, so if we return null, then it will say this one, right? Instead of I can say null, and now I have this. I don't know. I'm not okay. I don't have sonal in, but this is a code smell. If you're sending null, it's a code smell, which means you're going to miss something. And I don't have there's a plugin called Sonar Lint. I have not installed it on this ID. That's why it's not showing. Otherwise, it will come and tell me that don't send null back. It's a code smell. So that's why I would kind of send an empty list back. So then the caller does not have to handle null at any point of time. They know that whatever happens, I will just send an empty list. There's nothing there. I will not send a null. So they don't have to write a saying that okay, if this method return null, do this or do that. That's why we don't want to return null from a method. Any thoughts?
See, but internally empty list also has no value, right? So
Yeah, but the caller does not have to check, right? So for after this, what will happen is you have for whatever phone number, right? Number phone numbers, and then I can work from an empty list. I can just I don't need to write if phone number is equal to null or not. I can just write an empty list saying that okay, if it's empty, this will just the loop will just get out of it because it's an empty thing. So I don't need to write an if else condition. That's the thing.
okay. And also the empty list should it be under any condition? Because if the list is if it returns any value, then it should return list. If the list has no value, then it should be written empty, right?
Sorry, come again.
The line 49, sorry, 40, not 49.
Yeah.
See, we are returning empty list, assuming that the list is always empty, but that cannot be true.
No. This is we are using that there's a thing called optional. So it actually finds customer by
Okay.
ID. And if it does not find the customer, that is why or else get. So if it doesn't find the customer, it will return empty list. Otherwise, it will return a list. So there's a framework called optional. It is using. If I go here, yeah, this is the thing called optional. This is one way of avoiding writing. This optional kind of helps you avoiding writing that if null and all those things. It has some APIs. it will check if it is null, it will check for empty. So uh, then there is some uh, optional of nullable. If value is null, then it will return empty optional. Otherwise, it will return the actual value, and so on. So the and then you can check if it is if you the moment you wrap it in optional, whatever the object, you can then call this is present. So it will check whether the value is not equal to null. Similarly, is empty and so on. So it's a different API, and it actually helps writing this kind of a fluent code. So you can kind of it will not it looks nice. It looks nice and it's easy to understand. Like when you read it, people can just when the moment they read it, they can kind of understand that piece of code.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts?
One question that came up again, this from a product management perspective, is like
Yeah.
when the product managers and the software team are sitting together, often, I mean, at least in my experience, it has been that, we try and go through some of the edge cases or like that
Yeah.
can happen and there. And
Yeah.
it seems on closer reading on this chapter that what happens at the, inter-team collaboration about edge cases, corner cases, boundary conditions,
Yeah.
kind of probably are manifested as exceptions and errors at the coding level. Well, is that
Yeah.
how?
So
Yeah.
yeah. Uh,
Or it may not be also, but
yeah.
uh,
It's a business decision on that front,
mhm,
like a product decision basically. What happens is like you have an edge scenario. Okay, maybe um, the customer tried something and
yeah.
it just fell in that boundary thing. Now the code, I mean, absolutely, we are like from the code perspective, it will be driven by what the business decision is, right? So
Mhm,
we kind of go back to the product. Okay, this is an HTTP scenario we are finding, and we kind of basically ask them, okay, what is the best approach to do it? Having said that, a lot of the times, some of the business owners, they may not care about it.
mhm,
So what the outcome is. So in that, or they might suggest something which may not be correct from a technology standpoint. I'll give an example. So we have monitoring in our systems, and
yeah.
we use New Relic for monitoring. Then New Relic gives we can create dashboards with New Relics,
Mhm,
and the product owners are like very happy that they want this New Relic dashboard because it gives a dashboard and they can see what's happening. But
mhm,
what they also want is they want to be able to find out, how many orders went through, how many failed, and they
yeah.
want to dig deep. Okay, what did the customer select for this order, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the thing is, we could build that thing in New Relic. We could write queries and so forth, and everything we can do.
Mhm,
There's some limitation that it cannot be absolutely real time. We just have they have to
yeah.
give us a requirement to it.
Yeah.
So then in that scenario, what we did is we told them, what, New Relic is not the tool for you to do that.
Mhm,
You need a business intelligence tool.
mhm,
So all this data should go to a business intelligence tool, and then the dashboard that business intelligence tool will give you all that information. Then you can dig deep anywhere. You can do it all real time, and it will kind of give you all that information. So yeah,
mhm,
so just to bringing it home, like yeah, that so from a technical perspective, you kind of give that, what, from a technology standpoint, we can do anything with almost any tool basically. So I can use New Relic to do all those things for me,
yeah.
whatever the business is asking. But that is not the right thing for it. The New Relic is like more from a technology support perspective, like what the
Yeah.
system is going through and everything. And business intelligence is a different thing. So that's a separation of
Mm,
concern there. So we need to use the right tool for the right requirement. So that's a feedback that we gave back to business, saying
okay.
this is how you will suggest it to implement it and so on. So and then the how is a different story, like which team
Yeah.
builds it, that's a
Yeah.
different story. But this is like the architect, like a design decision that we took kind of a thing.
Mhm, mhm.
So yeah, so it's a touch and go. Certain scenarios, obviously, we will they will tell us, okay, this is the outcome that we want for this scenario. We kind of code straight away from it. Yeah, that's
Cool, cool.
it's always a discussion when with product and technology engineering teams as to what's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Got it. Got it.
All right, I think that's about it. It was a small chapter, not much on that one. So, any other thoughts or feedback?
So we are having a class next week, or are you planning to push to the next week?
Yeah, I'll cancel it.
Okay.
Most people won't come in, and then yeah.
Yeah. Cool, cool. Yeah, fine with me.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right
Thanks.
then. Thank you all for joining. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye. Have a
Thank
good New
you.
Year, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. See you next year.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. See you
Have a
next
good
year.
New Year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Yeah.